I'm 31 and I've been married to my husband for 4 years. When we first met, I already knew he was a workaholic. Honestly, I liked that about him at first. He was ambitious, knew what he wanted, and worked really hard to build the life he wanted. He manages commercial real estate for an investment company, so his days are usually packed with meetings, clients, and business trips. I work from home doing graphic design, so we both had our own careers and our own lives. His phone was basically going off all day, and honestly, I never really complained about how much he worked. When we first met, I actually liked how ambitious he was. I thought, this guy works hard, he knows what he wants. I figured he'd probably make a good husband, and eventually a good dad too. We got married 4 years ago, and honestly, those first couple of years were really good. We'd go out for dinner on the weekends, he'd bring me flowers sometimes, we'd take little trips. There were plenty of nights where we'd just stay up talking for hours. Back then, I really didn't have much reason to think anything was wrong. That's probably why everything that happened later was so confusing. He wasn't some distant husband who never paid attention to me. There were plenty of times when he was actually really sweet, but over the last year, things started changing. Our biggest problem was that we couldn't have a baby, and I really wanted us to see a doctor. I wanted him to get checked too, but every time I brought it up, there was another reason to wait. Work was crazy. There was a promotion he really wanted, the company needed him, and he kept saying things would calm down once he got through this busy period. I tried to understand. I knew how important his career was to him, and I didn't want to be the wife who was constantly complaining about his job. Still, after a while, it started to hurt. I wanted us to start a family. One night, I finally asked him, "How much longer are we going to keep putting this off?" He told me things would be different once he got his promotion. Then he said he was doing all of this for our future. And honestly, it sounded reasonable, so I let it go again. Looking back, I think I was already getting used to putting my own needs aside whenever his career came first. That's around the time I started noticing little things. Nothing I could point to and say, he's cheating. He just started keeping his phone with him more often. Sometimes, when a message came in, he'd turn the screen away from me. I'd notice it, and then I'd immediately get annoyed with myself for being suspicious. I mean, he was on his phone all day for work, so of course he was always checking messages. One time, I asked him why he'd moved the screen away. He just said, "I deal with work stuff all day, that's all." I didn't love the answer, but I didn't argue with him either. Our marriage was already going through a rough period, and I really didn't want to make things worse by getting jealous over something that might mean nothing. Then our physical relationship started changing too. There were still times when he was really affectionate with me, but whenever I'd try to get close, there always seemed to be a reason he couldn't. Not tonight. I have to get up early. This week has been crazy. I told him, "I feel like you've been pulling away lately." He told me it had nothing to do with me. According to him, he was just working harder because of the promotion. Then he hugged me, and for a few minutes, everything felt normal again. That's why I kept questioning myself. One day, he'd seem distant, and the next day we'd go out for dinner and have a really nice night together. Sometimes I genuinely felt loved. Other times I felt like I only came after his job. I didn't really know what to think anymore. One evening, I was moving my husband's bag from the living room when it slipped out of my hand and fell. A few things came out when I picked everything back up. That's when I noticed a phone I'd never seen before. I picked it up, and when my husband came out of the bathroom, I showed it to him. I asked, "What is this phone?" He answered pretty quickly. He said it was a second phone he used for work, that the company had given it to him, and that he barely used it. The way he said it was so casual that I didn't really question him. I just handed the phone back, and honestly, I tried to forget about it, but a few days later I realized I still couldn't stop thinking about that phone. It kept bothering me for some reason. Then one night, my husband was upstairs in our bedroom, and I went into the room after him. I don't even know what made me do it. I just had this feeling that wouldn't go away. His bag was there. I opened it. The second phone was still inside. I picked it up. The screen was locked, and I obviously didn't know the passcode. I wasn't trying to go through everything. I was actually about to put it back when the screen suddenly lit up. A Tinder notification appeared. I just froze. For a few seconds, I stared at the screen. Then I heard the shower stop in the bathroom. I knew he was about to come out, so I quickly put the phone back in his bag. I closed it and quietly left the bedroom. I went downstairs and acted completely normal. A few minutes later, my husband came over and kissed me. I acted like nothing had happened. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I didn't ask him about Tinder, but from that moment on, it became really hard for me to believe that phone was just for work. The next day, I was still thinking about it. At the same time, I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. I knew what Tinder was. Everyone does. Seeing a Tinder notification on a married man's second phone wasn't exactly normal, but I still didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was an old account. Maybe it was an old notification. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. I know how weak those excuses sound now. But when it's someone you love, your brain will do almost anything to avoid believing the worst. That's exactly what I was doing. I didn't want to believe my husband was actually talking to other women, so I decided to check. I went on Tinder, and I didn't use my own picture, and I definitely didn't use my real name. Instead, I made a completely different woman's profile. Then I set the location to our area. At first, I found nothing. I checked again the next day. Still nothing. For a few days, I kept looking every now and then. I told myself, okay, enough. You're seriously overthinking this. I closed the app and went back to work. Part of me actually felt relieved. I didn't want to believe my husband would do something like that. Then, a few days later, I opened the app again, and there he was, his picture, his actual picture. The name and age were different. Some of the information about his job wasn't exactly right either, but there was no way I could mistake that face. I just stared at the screen. My first thought was, that's him. Then I thought, there has to be an explanation. I didn't know what to do. I could have confronted him right away, but I didn't want to. Some part of me still thought I might be misunderstanding something. So instead, I sent him a simple message from the fake profile. Hey, how's your week going? A few minutes later, he replied, good, busy. You? My heart started beating really fast, because this wasn't just a profile anymore. I was actually talking to my husband. I replied, same. You seem busy. He started telling me about work. Then he asked where I lived and what I did. I kept my answers pretty general. After a while, the conversation started getting a little flirty, so I decided to push him just a little. I wrote, I'm guessing you get a lot of attention on here. His answer came back pretty quickly. Not from the right women. My stomach dropped when I read that, because now there was no way to pretend this was innocent. My husband was actually interested in another woman. We talked a little more. Then he asked, are you free sometime this week? I didn't answer. A few minutes later, another message came through. Want to grab a drink? I put my phone down. That was enough for me. I wasn't going to meet him, and I didn't need to test him anymore. But he kept messaging. Hey, you there? Then, where'd you go? A little later, he sent, did I say something? I still didn't answer. And honestly, that's when something inside me broke. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. My husband was actually trying to meet another woman. By the way, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm genuinely curious. When all of this was happening, I used to lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything. I cried that night, not just because I was angry. I think I was more hurt because I felt like an idiot. For the last year, I'd been trying to get him to take our fertility problems seriously. I wanted him to see a doctor. I wanted us to plan our future together, but he'd always tell me he was too busy with work. There was always another meeting, deadline, or reason to wait. I kept trying to be understanding. I kept putting my own wants aside, and now I was watching him make time for other women. That was what hurt the most. He'd always told me, I don't have time. Apparently he did. He just wasn't using it on me. The next morning, I didn't walk up to him and say, I saw you on Tinder. I still loved him. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I still believed there might be a way to save our marriage. I also wanted answers. How long had this been going on? Had he actually met anyone? Or was he just talking to women? I didn't know, so I stayed quiet for a little longer, but I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. One night, when he hugged me, I wanted to cry. Just days earlier, I'd seen him trying to meet another woman. Now he acted like everything was normal. The strange thing was, he still seemed to care about me. Over the next few weeks, I noticed little things. He was more careful with his phone. He seemed tense before business trips. Sometimes he'd come home and be affectionate. One night, he even came home with flowers. He hugged me and said, I'm sorry I haven't been giving you enough time lately. I told him, yeah, you really haven't. We had dinner and talked for hours. For a moment, I thought, maybe we can fix this. And honestly, that was the hardest part. My husband wasn't completely cold or uncaring. He might still have loved me. At the same time, he could still be cheating on me. It's hard to accept those two things at once. One night, I brought up having kids again. "I really think we should see a doctor now," I told him. He looked at me and said, "It's just not the right time." "When is the right time going to be?" "After I get the promotion." "You said that last year too." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he said, "I'm doing this for our family." "I know. I'm thinking about our family too. I just want us to actually do something about it." He tried to hug me. This time, I pulled away. Nothing he said felt simple anymore. I was starting to realize something else about him. He had always wanted the best of everything. The best job, car, the best people around him. There was always something more he wanted. For years, I thought that was just ambition. Maybe part of it was, but I realized it wasn't only about his career. Things usually had to happen his way. When I talked about wanting to work more, he'd say, "I already make enough for both of us." He never sounded openly controlling. He'd make it sound like he was taking care of me. Over time, I started seeing another side of it. He also wanted a say in how much control I had over my own life. After a while, I felt like I needed more proof. So I took screenshots of his Tinder profile. I saved some messages and wrote down the dates. Then I noticed something else. Little details made me think the account had been active for a while. I started wondering how long he had been doing this. That was when I realized this was not just about Tinder. I started questioning my entire marriage. One night, I decided to talk to him. Before doing it, I went over what I wanted to say in my head. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to humiliate him. I just wanted the truth. Maybe deep down, I still wanted to save our marriage. I wasn't ready to throw away 4 years together. One night, I finally told him, "I think something is seriously wrong with our marriage." He looked at me. "What do you mean? I feel like things between us have changed. Are we really doing this again? I just want to talk. I already tell you everything." "No, you don't." His expression changed. And then I thought about the dates. Then I realized something. I couldn't make my decision based on whatever explanation he gave me anymore. Every time I'd asked him something, he had a reasonable answer. And for years, I'd believed him. My husband left for a few days on a business trip. Before he left, he hugged me. "When I get back, let's have a nice weekend together." "Okay," I said. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table and thought for hours. I wasn't ready to forgive him, but I still wasn't completely sure about divorce either. Part of me kept thinking, maybe we really can talk this out. Then I printed the screenshots, some of the messages too. Everything went onto the table. Next to it, I left a piece of paper. I wrote just 4 words. "I want a divorce." My hands were shaking while I wrote it. For the first time, I was really accepting that my 4-year marriage might be over. Then I left the house. I didn't go to my parents because they live in another city. Instead, I went to stay with my aunt. I'm a pretty private person, and I don't like telling my family everything. So I didn't tell my mom and dad all the details right away. Eventually, though, I had to tell them some of it. When my husband came back from his trip, I wasn't home. He saw everything I'd left on the table. Then he called me. His voice sounded completely different when I answered. "Where are you?" "I'm at my aunt's." "Why?" I didn't answer for a second. Then I said, "Because we need to talk." "About what?" "About our marriage." There was a long silence. Then he said, "Come home." "No. Please come home." "No." His voice got harder. "You really think you're going to leave me?" I didn't say anything. Then he said, "That isn't going to happen." "What?" "We're not getting divorced." After that, he kept repeating the same things. He loved me. He wasn't going to let me go. It had been a mistake. We could fix everything. But I wasn't responding the way I used to. Because I knew him. He knew that if he made me feel guilty, I'd usually back down. Sometimes he'd get angry. Then he'd calm down. After that, he'd hug me. Eventually, I'd forgive him. But this time was different. I had real proof, and he knew it. At one point, he said, "If you think you can just leave me, you're wrong." That sentence really shook me. This wasn't a man simply trying to save his marriage anymore. He was talking like I didn't even have the right to make that decision for myself. My parents aren't confrontational people, neither am I. So when I finally told them everything, they were much calmer than I expected. My mom simply said, "You get to decide what you want to do." My dad said, "We're here for you." They didn't say much more. Still, I could see how shocked they were. They knew my husband too. They had never seen him as this kind of person. Honestly, neither had I. That's what made everything so hard to process. At one point, I genuinely thought I might forgive him. Maybe he'd apologize. Maybe I'd believe he could really change. I almost let myself go there again. Then the threats started. He kept saying he wasn't going to let me leave, like divorce wasn't even a decision I was allowed to make, like because I was his wife, I didn't get to decide when I was done. And honestly, I don't think the cheating itself hurt me the most. It wasn't even the embarrassment. What hurt the most was realizing that the person I'd spent years with had treated me like I was stupid. I supported his career, I understood how hard he worked, I wanted kids, but I kept waiting for him to be ready. Over and over, I put my own wants aside. All that time, I thought he was doing the same thing for our future. Then I found out that the man who kept telling me he didn't have time somehow had plenty of time to meet other women. And now he was telling me I didn't have the right to leave him. I can't accept that. My family is behind me, my aunt is behind me, but I'm still shocked by how different he's become. The man I thought I knew and the man I'm dealing with now don't even feel like the same person. Maybe that's the part I'm still trying to understand. So if you were in my position, what would you do? Would you get divorced? Or would you give a 4-year marriage one more chance? I'm still trying to figure that out. But this time, I'm not going to make my decision based on what he wants. I'm going to make it based on what I want. And if you have a story you'd like me to tell, you can email me the details. You'll find the email address in the description. Names and some location details will be changed to protect your privacy. If you like more true story like this, don't forget to subscribe. Take care. Bye.